don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Turn the friggin' frogs gay. Serious crap. Gay. Frogs, friggin' frogs. It's not funny. I'm gonna say it real slow for you. Gay. Frog.
Big Farma is making the transgenders. Today, we're gonna watch the clip from the recent Jordan Peterson video and the Robert freaking Kennedy Jr. video. We're also gonna discuss chemicals in the water, gay trans depression, and what do I think? Let's get right into it.
I've seen the climate apocalypse use fear to induce something approximating the same kind of level of tyranny, as far as I'm concerned, that characterized the vaccine lockdown. Help me sort that out and understand where you stand.
I see these huge levels of depression and despair, loneliness in kids. And I don't think that there's a single cause to it. And I think blaming it on, depression about climate is probably oversimplistic. And in fact, I think a lot of the problems we see in kids, and particularly boys, it's probably underappreciated that how much of that is coming from chemical exposures, including a lot of the sexual dysphoria that we're seeing. They're swimming through a soup of toxic chemicals today, and many of those are endocrine disruptors. There's atrazine throughout our water supply. Atrazine, by the way, if you in a lab put atrazine in a tank full of frogs, it will chemically castrate and forcibly feminize every frog in there, and 10% of the frogs, the male frogs, will turn into fully viable females able to produce viable eggs. If it's doing that to frogs, there's a lot of other evidence that it's doing it to human beings as well.
So summarizing JFK Jr.'s points here, depression in our youth is caused by multiple sources, and it's oversimplification to blame it all on climate change and doomerism. In boys, and specifically AMAP people, JFK Jr. thinks that there are tons of issues due to chemical exposure, specifically atrazine, and these endocrine disruptors cause sexual dysphoria in our youth and in our people in general. Now, atrazine turns the frogs female. 10% even become fertile lady frogs. So let's talk about some chemicals in the water. Here, I pulled up a map of the United States and where they use atrazine, how much atrazine they use. As you can see, that's a ton of atrazine in our farms. Big Farma is literally trying to do this on purpose. So atrazine is an herbicide used to control weeds in crops like corn, sorghum, sugarcane, other stuff. It's considered by the Endocrine Society to be extremely dangerous for endocrine systems, and it's actually banned in Europe. So if you look at here, I pulled the map up a little bit bigger. Now this is a ton of gay frog chemicals, right? This is a ton of tranny frog chemicals. They're all over the US. They're banned in Europe. The US is in bed with Big Pharma and the corporatocracy. This is just big chemical supply. This is just big chemicals. Big Pharma, big chemicals in bed with big government. Now, you're probably like, Cat, quit pulling my leg. Female male frogs aren't real. They can't be. That's basic biology 101. Male can't become female. But guess what? You're being a snowflake. Yes, they can. It literally happened. This guy right here, Tyrone Hayes, showed atrazine, one of the world's most widely used pesticides, can cause sexual abnormalities in frogs.
When it comes to atrazine and specifically hermaphroditism, can you just list out the studies that show that in amphibians, when you expose them to atrazine at any dose, it doesn't matter. Can you just list studies that echo your findings?
So specifically work on amphibians, there's a group in Florida, I think Lou Gillette was one of the co-authors, that showed that atrazine had feminizing effect on amphibians. There's a group in Canada, Trudeau, I think, was a co-author there that showed that atrazine had feminizing effects or demasculinizing effects on amphibians. There's my work. There's actually the company's work. So the original work that Jim Carr and those guys put out, if you look at the data, they actually show a greater percentage and a statistically significant number of exposed animals that developed as hermaphrodites. I mean, it's in their very own paper. Even though they say they didn't repeat it, it's published. Their data is showing the suppression of testosterone, again, in their own work that Syngento's published. Where else has it come out? And there's multiple studies in fish showing a decline in testosterone and an increase in estrogen. In fact, a study by the U.S. Geological Survey just came out a few months ago showing that the effects of atrazine in fish are carried on for 3 or 4 generations after the exposure.
Frogs raised in laboratory tanks contaminated with atrazine, they develop egg cells in their testes, and essentially they turn into hermaphrodites.
What's happening is you're skewing sex ratios. You can get genetic bottlenecking, which can cause crashes. And quite frankly, if you're a genetic male, it'd be nice if you're developed as a genetic male. And now we have a chemical very common in the environment that's effectively sex reversing animals.
Changes were observed at atrazine levels as low as 0.1 per billion, which is 30 times lower than the current allowed limit for atrazine. So we're allowing all these atrazine that's making hermaphrodites, making low T males, making like genetically inferior males and females. Not inferior, but like for reproduction purposes, right? We are less reproductively viable because of the big pharma, big government, big chemicals. So Tyrone Hayes did this study and he found that like 10%, up to 10% of male frogs turn into fully viable female frogs. They develop eggs. It's wild. It's so wild. So let's talk about endocrine disruptors. You're probably like, well, how is this even happening? What is an endocrine disruptor? Endocrine disruptors, they mess with endocrine hormone glands in your brain. They've been linked to transgenerational issues as well as lower testosterone or increased estrogen. Think of things like epigenetics and other things that have the ability to go through generations.
USGS, that's the U.S. Geological Survey study. So that's a study that showed feminizing effects on fish. And then a more recent paper shows that 3 or 4 generations down the road, you still see impacts on gene expression in those fish after they were exposed. Yeah, that's Don Tillett.
So let's talk about depression. You know, what causes depression?
Shout out mental illness. Because I got depression.
Endocrine disorders often cause or coexist with depression. Thyroid, parathyroid, and adrenal diseases, as well as diabetes and abnormalities in the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid and hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axes, which can all result in depression. But those axes are also the ones responsible for guiding your hormones and like development, right? So these endocrine disruptors, not only do they mess up your body, they also are impacting your brain. So how are we feeling so far? Leave a comment, drop it below, tell me what you think, because we have this next one's a banger. Transgenderism.
Let me tell you, Jonathan, that's so freaking rude. I was just hanging out, grown in my mama's room. I saw this Syngenta dude. What the fuck do you want to do? Why are you spraying me with atrazine? I don't want it. I feel less manly. I feel like I'm thinning up. I'm growing a butt. My tits are bigger. I don't know. I see how I'm gonna nut when I see a dude. Oh god. Atrazine, PCBs, EDCs. Why? They make me dream. I just want a dick in my butt. Thanks, Synergy, Energy, Sin Delta, Atrazine. How could you do this to me? Oh god, I was just chilling in my mama's room. Now I wanna die. Oh god. Oh god. I had depression thanks to NASA, Synergy, whatever the fuck your name is.
There have been some recent studies connecting endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs, with transgenderism. While more research does need to be done because Synalta or Synergy or Synergeta or whatever they're called is like trying to hide all this information.
And so the conclusion of the original EPA panel that there wasn't enough data and more studies need to be done, that conclusion was to the benefit of Cloas. So it was to his benefit to say, oh, more studies need to be done. And by the way, Syngenta's already whispering in his ear, we have millions of dollars for you to do it. And if you look at that published work, it was essentially a collaboration between the EPA and between Syngenta. So Alan Hosmer was involved in that study. Tom Steger with the EPA was involved in designing and setting up that study. And the idea was for us to make a state-of-the-art design and to say, this is the only kind of study that we're going to accept.
Enough independent studies are coming out that are linking endocrine disruptors to genetic abnormalities, health issues, depression, other mental health issues. But if we link back to what we thought earlier, to what we learned about earlier about epigenetics, right? Transgenderism is likely, in part, caused by the epigenetic transmission of endocrine disrupting chemicals in not just our bodies, but in our parents' bodies when they were born. In addition to things like lead, in addition to things like microplastics, in addition to all these other chemicals that have been used because our government is in bed with big corporate. Yes, Big Farma with an F is also in big corporate. So let's just go ahead and...
Sorry for body rocking.
We live in a dying world full of chemicals that are permanently changing our bodies, our DNA, our epigenetics, our minds. Woo! We're literally cyborgs. We're half microplastic, half cyborg, half human. We're good at math, and that's what we're up to nowadays with all these endocrine disruptors in our brain. But we're here. We're queer. It's our whole generation. It's likely your generation as well, because guess what? You're eating the same endocrine disruption. You're eating the same shit. My thoughts. There's a few things I want to link here. JFK Jr., RFK Jr., whatever his name is, he is talking about primarily males. But in my research, I did find that PCOS is highly increased for cis women as well. Now, one of the interesting things about PCOS, and I learned this a long time ago, so I don't have the exact data to back it up, but you can find it if you research it. People with PCOS are often more likely to tune out. They're more likely to transition, and it's because of like issues with their hormones, right? They're more predisposed to a transition, and I think when we really think about it, the kind of guys that are transitioning to women are also depleted in many ways, right? They're usually very slender. They struggle to put on muscle.
Not always. Not everybody is like this.
They have other issues, other health issues, mental health issues. They have autism. All these things are correlated with endocrine disruptors, right? They're correlated with these chemicals. So we might be transitioning because our genes have been like impacted because of all these chemicals. We're still alive. We're still carrying through with it. We are still here. We are as depressed, gay, trans people. We should be suing the government. We should be suing the EPA specifically and suing Big Farma for this shit because they have poisoned us. And now they're trying to hurt us because of the fact that we are the way we are when they made us how we were. So I want you to think of Gen Z, and again, all the other generations, we're all eating it, but Gen Z has the largest culmination of effects. Your grandparents were eating these things, they passed down some of it. Your parents were eating some of these, they passed down some more of it. Now you have been eating these things since you were born likely. You have them in your body. You're going to pass them down if you're even able to have kids. Even if you even want to have kids, right? Why would you want to bring kids into this world? But you are going to pass these things down to your children as well. So we should be all standing together and suing the government, suing the EPA, suing the people that did this to us, rather than victim blaming and trying to stop people from making the most of their situations. Guess what? I'm a low T male. I'm transitioning because I'd rather have some sex hormones and I don't want to boost myself up with testosterone. That's how you get a heart attack. That's how you get prostate cancer. That's how you get all these health issues. I was born low T. I'm supplementing. It's not my fault. Talk to the fucking Big Farma who was putting Atrazine in my mom's water supply. Okay? I'm not defensive or anything. I'm just saying. Don't victim blame us. Don't hate on the victims. Hate the people that made us this way. You think we're disabled? You think we're mentally ill? You think we're fucked up? Guess who did it? Your government, my government, your Big Pharma, my Big Pharma. The big structures in place that control our lives did this to us. We didn't do this to ourselves. So what is the government like to focus on to keep our mind off of this? They like to focus on money and the debt ceiling. They like to focus on big business and lobbying. How can we fill our pockets? And they like to focus on culture wars to distract from the big business and lobbyists. Thank you. And some general thoughts. So how do I feel about all this? Honestly, I'm pretty fucking angry, right? Because here I am, thinking I was transgender because of what? Some like miracleness, because I'm magical like a shaman, when in reality maybe I'm transgender because the government fucked me up, because the government didn't have regulations in place, because the government and the EPA banned the studies that were literally there about atrazine and the harmful effects of it.
I only know their last report, which finally, after 2 decades, admitted that atrazine was a reproductive toxin and a potential threat to terrestrial and aquatic life. That came out a couple years ago.
Harmful effects of it, so they could listen to the business who made atrazine.
With the payoff. And so the conclusion of the original EPA panel that there wasn't enough data and more studies need to be done, that conclusion was to the benefit of Cloas. So it was to his benefit to say, oh, more studies need to be done. And by the way, Syngenta's already whispering in his ear, we have millions of dollars for you to do it.
So they could listen to them about these issues. So I'm just a little bit angry about that. So I'm a little angry there. But all in all, I'm pretty fine with it, because in my head, it doesn't matter the reason why I'm transgender. It doesn't matter the reason why I'm transitioning, why I want to transition. Ultimately, I feel better transitioning. I feel better with that on estrogen. I feel better when I'm taking steps to combat the fuckedness that my biology has given me through genetics, epigenetics, whatever you want to call it. I am taking control of myself. You know, I believe in personal freedom. I believe in personal autonomy. I believe in personal responsibility. And I'm taking responsibility for myself. I'm not suing these companies, at least not yet. I'm not forcing them to live up to my life. I'm making the best with what I've been given and the best with what I've been bred into. So that's what I got. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think down below, and thanks for listening.